So if you could just talk a little bit about the process and materials.
Yeah, so basically it's carved wood, which is covered with gesso, and then that's where I get the surface. And I use pigmented clay for color, graphite powders, stuff like that, and then actual real gold leaf to accent certain areas.
These are all materials that you're calling old world materials, but you're using them to create contemporary artwork. And so
Yeah.
I think that's something that people are kind of responding to is, while none of these materials are new, people just aren't accustomed to seeing these materials used in the way that you're using them.
Yeah. So like I work for a shop in town that we do high-end frames, and it's basically the same process that we do with the frames, but I abstracted it and made it into my own art like over 20 years ago. So same materials.
Right, so you've had 20 years to master the process of your carving wood with hand tools. And then when we were talking the other day, you had mentioned just in terms of if you're making a frame, there's certain rules that you are following because you're producing something that is a picture frame. Whereas within this work, perhaps you're using some of the rules of the materials, but you have less rules. You're making abstract work. You get to.
So yeah, I kind of stumbled on it when about 20 years ago, when I was playing around with the materials, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. I can do this, carve this, use the same materials, but it's not a frame. It's also like, what is it made out of? And I think I get a lot of that. Like, is this made out of metal? Is it graphite?
And I think, and I've sent some people into the gallery and said, it's hand carved wood, and they've come out and they're like, well, where's the wood? And one of the things we had talked about previously is part of the process of using the gesso with the wood and just also going into gilding is originally or historically it was an attempt to make something look like it was just solid gold.
Yeah,
as opposed to like, yes, this is my solid gold frame.
It's like a form of alchemy where originally you can't like make something substantial out of solid gold sometimes, so it would be
maybe cost prohibitive.
Yeah, you make it appear to look like it's solid gold. So, and that's basically the technique of covering the wood with gesso, because you can make it look very smooth and it doesn't have the wood grain, and then gild it. It's like it's actually made out of solid gold. So.
And then in the context of the picture frames that you make at Gold Leaf Frame Makers, people will come in and ask for either a picture frame that fits their painting, the period, that type of thing, or they might just ask for an 18th century Dutch frame. I'm making that up. So by day, you're bound by those rules.
Yeah.
So I would think it would be kind of liberating to go home and you can just make whatever you want.
Just take it off into my own world.
Yeah. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about mentors as well, the importance of having mentors and being a mentor, because as I understand it, when you started carving wood and working at a picture frame shop back in Cleveland, that was where you met your original mentor.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about that process a bit?
Yeah, well,
how that came to be?
It was kind of right when I started carving on my own. And he was a woodworker, my friend Lou, and he taught me integrity and working with materials and making things good. And he said, Roland, there's enough shit in the world. Don't put any more out there.
Yeah.
So that's always stuck in my head. So Yeah, and before, he didn't really get to see a lot of the art that I've been making before he died, but he did toward the end, and he was very impressed of carving and everything I've been doing, so.
And at that time, you were working in the picture frame shop, and then you were making other art, but it wasn't necessarily with these materials. Is
No, I
that
didn't start doing
right?
this style until I moved to Santa Fe and started looking at boulders, so. It was like opened up a new world, so that's what I've been diving into for the last couple of decades.
And then is it safe to say at Gold Leaf is where you picked up water gilding and
Yeah.
mastered kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, I learned a little bit in Cleveland. And then when I came here, that's where I learned a lot of that technique. And like Marty Horowitz was definitely a mentor too in the gilding realm. So learned a lot from him. And it's a very interesting technique.
Yeah, so how does water gilding compare to, well, there's two types of gilding, as I understand it. There's water gilding, and then what's the other type
Oil
of
gilding.
Oil gilding. And how are those different?
Water gilding is the technique that I use on these pieces, and the base is gesso and then clay, and the gold basically is laid on a watered surface, and it takes the shape of whatever it's laid on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can also burnish it, which makes it shinier. And oil gilding is more like it's like a tacky, like a lacquer. And that's what a lot of people do for like sign painting and stuff like that. So you can basically gild anything with oil gilding, any surface, as long as it's not too porous. So.
But your preference for the water gilding, is there?
It has a different effect. It's like very smooth.
And you had mentioned in working at Gold Leaf and getting to interact with a lot of great paintings that you were reframing and just seeing all of those different frame styles historically. You've learned about a lot about art history as well. It's been a whole extra education. Would you say there's one or two points that have come from that have maybe found to be particularly inspiring, or just any good stories?
It's been cool to learn all the different styles and a lot of local history too, like of the top school painters and the style of their carves, their frames were. But then overall, like, yeah, I learned Spanish, Italian, French, all these different styles that have come out of these works of art that apply to the painter. Some of the painters and artists actually design their own frames that they either carved themselves or they had somebody carve. So that's very interesting.
That is super interesting. I would say in this day and age, sometimes I interact with artists and they're very specific. They're like, this is my frame, this is the style, but at a certain point, once somebody purchases it, maybe they go frame it in any way they want. So it's kind of cool to hear the stories of these artists at, at whatever point that stuck, that you're still saying, no, this is so-and-so artist, this is.
So if somebody comes in the shop and they have this certain painting from one of the artists from New Mexico, it's like, oh, that needs this style frame to be accurate. So
right, to be
so
historically accurate.
Work-wise.
So your pieces don't actually require frames.
No, I don't ever want to frame my art. So I started making art that I didn't have to frame.
Yeah.
So I used to paint and draw.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's one of the perks for working as a framer.
But if I did.
As an artist. So let's talk about some of the tools that you're using. You use the occasional power tool for something like maybe cutting a sharp line or something like that. But These are all hand tools and you have a collection of hand tools.
Yeah, I mean, basically, like, I'll use the table saw to cut the panel or whatever piece of wood, but everything's hand carved with gouges and chisels.
Do you have a favorite tool to work with?
No, it's all over. Depends on what it is.
Depends on what you're
Yeah.
doing. Isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And in terms of it being 2024 and you can have any materials in the world to work with, within reason, of course, what is it about these specific materials? We talked a little bit before about how prior to moving to New Mexico and starting to work with these materials, you were doing maybe slight, I don't know, you were painting and drawing and using other mediums and not working in this way. But when you started working in this way, you mentioned you felt like you kind of found, I mean, that's the big challenge of being an artist, right? Is finding a style that's distinctively you. And so how did you arrive there and how did you know?
I think it was just when I first started playing around with this idea, and it was like, oh, this is interesting, and I don't see it anywhere. So, and that's the feedback I get a lot too, is like, I don't see a lot of art like this. So I strive to do that and have something original.
Yet it feels very natural as well, because that's the other issue potentially sometimes with artists that are trying to do something distinctive, is it just doesn't, it just feels like they're just trying to do something different to do something different, but it doesn't feel authentically them, where I don't feel like it's the case in your work. It feels like it's just naturally coming from you.
Yeah, and I think like painters do like an underpainting and work from there. I feel like my pieces are like the carve is the underpainting, works from there, like what develops after that. So I'll have multiple pieces in the works, and then as it goes, they start developing. It's like, oh, because this color, this gold, or so.
How many pieces are you usually working on at once?
Depends, like if they're in the same size realm, I might work on all of them at the same time. But it's like, I'll do this step and the next step, and then look at them individually and figure out what to do.
Well, that's kind of fun because you're not just focused on one.
Yeah, a lot of times
thing.
it's not just one piece, it's multiple pieces, and my attention span can like go all over the place.
So it's good for that.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite piece in this exhibition?
Well, these blue ones were brand new. It was an experiment. I think that one is one of my favorites.
You just know it when you see it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the case too when you're viewing other people's artwork. Sometimes it's hard to totally even articulate why. It's more of a feeling or something along those lines. And then going back to mentorship, at this point in your career, you're mentoring a lot of other artists as well and teaching them these processes, which I think is very important. And in working here at Historic Santa Fe Foundation is something I've been thinking about a lot recently in the context of historic preservation. We're kind of at this point where there are still people, a lot of people invested in that, but it's important to teach those things to the younger generation. And I feel like that is true with your artwork as well. So
yeah, it's good to pass the torch and carry on the information, because it's all dying. Like not a lot of people are doing certain things that have been done for years. It's like all becoming computerized, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's good to know where things came from originally, how it was done. That's what I like about woodworking, carving. It's, you can use a CNC machine for whatever, but it's good to know how to actually do it by hand. sculpture. I think artists in general should know where techniques came from.
It's not,
Utilize new tools and technology, but know how it was actually done.
the origin
Yeah,
of the
the origin,
thing, yeah, and it's not even just the process itself, like you mix this thing with that thing and then you do this.
Yeah.
But a lot of those stories, like you were telling me the other day about, was the king in France or something, had like set the style
Yeah,
of,
but all the French kings had their own, all the Louis. So there's like Louis the 14th, Louis the 15th, all those styles are different, but it was like pertaining to what they wanted, and they had their artisans make the frames, the art to like match what they wanted, their style. So some of them were more like lavish and crazy carves, and some of them more simple. But it's interesting, all that history.
yeah, and I would imagine when you're creating something, you're kind of digging into that, so to not just teach the process, but having that foundation as well is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And when you started working at Gold Leaf Frame Makers is also when you were exposed to a lot of other artists who were working in the industry, but then creating artwork by night. So it seemed like that was a pretty big inspiration for
Yeah.
you as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we have the opportunity to use the shop after hours. So it was like, this is cool. So got all the tools here. And initially when I first started there, I had a couple friends that worked there as well. And that's what we do, like hang out after hours, make art, have art nights. So play around with the materials.
Well, and that's just a great community
Yeah.
as well. And just kind of an amazing compliment as well, because there's that challenge of being an artist and making a living as a full-time artist. Only so many people get to do that. So having a profession that complements that as well is kind of its own education, its own community.
Yeah.
So can you imagine if you ended up somewhere else?
I think about that.
What would you be doing? Have you thought about that?
I almost ended up in New York City at one point, but I was like, no, I like New Mexico.
Good speed.
Yeah.
Well, and so you play music as well. So maybe if somebody took away all of your visual art making tools for whatever reason, maybe just play more music, or do you think you'd pick up some other?
Well, I never bored, so like there's always stuff I can do. So yeah, I actually want to play more music right now. Now that I finished the show.
Well,
I
I
keep
was
looking
saying
at my guitar.
we should have brought it.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest passions. Music. I'm a music lover. I love to play it. So. I just like making things. So.
Making things, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And do you feel like your music informs your visual art and vice versa?
Yeah,
Can
definitely.
you articulate that connection?
Well, I'm always listening to music. So when I'm making art, I'm listening to music. Sometimes the titles of the art is based on lyrics of songs. So, or when I'm diving into the piece, particular music I'm listening to is informing the way that I move, and the way that I'm carving.
Does it ever work the other way around?
Artwork informing music?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, so something else I wanted to talk about that I think is interesting too, just if we could talk about the role of gold leaf historically in picture frames, how that was used as a light source.
Oh yeah. Before electricity, they would have the sconce under the frame, and because it was gold, it would illuminate the painting when you have a lower light source. So at night, that would bounce the light onto the painting.
Yeah, so we no
And it was
longer
like-
need that anymore. We have
Yeah.
electricity, but we continue to make those frames.
Yeah, and well, we replicate like older frames, so, but originally, like a 17th century hand carved gilded frame would have been just like sparkling gold, wouldn't be patinaed and just be pure gold leaf. And yeah, mainly to like show your prestige and wealth.
So I've been trying to decide which piece in the show is my favorite, and I have many, but I think my current favorite is, there's the two double stacked pieces there. The one below there kind of feels like a little horizontal landscape to me. I love all the textures in it. And I think there are multiple different types of gold leaf within that.
Yeah, that one has 16 karat and 18 karat. So it's like a paler gold. The higher the carat of leaf, it'll be darker. That's 23 karat.
Mm.
And then it's 12 karat. It looks more like silver.
And I forget which one it is, but one has moon gold. What is moon gold?
Yeah, that's that one. Just a mixture of different metals. Has a little bit of gold and then, but it has like a kind of a warmer. I'm not sure why it's called moon gold, but
It's a really good name.
it's a really pretty leaf.
And some of them, you're burning the wood a little bit, which follows the Japanese tradition, right? So we see a little bit of that with that piece to the left of the two I was just talking about, and then those pieces as well. So a little Japanese influence there.
Yeah, and I discovered that I was playing around with it, and I had a larger piece and a series of pieces years ago that I was playing around with the torch and just instead of staining the wood, actually burning it. There is a whole method of that. I was actually talking to a friend the other day that is working up at 10,000 waves, and they do that some of that on the woodworking up there.
Oh yeah, because it seals the wood and it's a really interesting process. So yeah, that kind of, that's another one of my favorites over there as well. Also feels like a little landscape as well. And then I love what you're doing here with the pieces that have the multiple pieces that kind of highlight the negative space. Is that something you've done for a while?
These three pieces were like a newer idea, like a year and a half, 2 years ago that I did. And I'd like to experiment with that more, of like fragments and pieces that go together to make one piece.
Only then you have to install them because you can't necessarily trust other people to know.
Yeah. My good friend Jason helped me hang the show, and I hung those three pieces while he hung the rest of the show while I was measuring meticulously. So yeah, they're
Well, I'll turn it over to you guys for questions in a moment, but first I want to ask about these pieces that employ glass as well. Those were a little bit of a collaboration, right?
I did a workshop with a woman years ago that I learned. My initial idea was, this is called slumped glass, and I would carve a piece and then you'd lay a piece of glass on it, put it in the kiln, and it would basically form to the carve. So that was my initial idea, and then
you actually kind of see the wood grain in it.
You can see it in some of the pieces. And then I learned to blow glass and make forms and stuff like that. So basically I made a bunch of objects, and I had a series of pieces that a lot of them sold that were like wall mounted slumped glass.
Just the glass, no other.
Yeah, it was basically glass and gilding.
So beyond being here tonight, if anybody here is interested in working in some of these styles and processes, is there a suggestion that you would have for getting a start, or things they should read, or just ways to educate themselves?
I've just found like experimenting with materials, knowing somebody that uses those materials, and hands-on learning is my method.
Reaching out, finding that community.
Yeah, I find that I've learned a lot that way.
And Santa Fe is a pretty good place for
There's
that. Pretty good.
lots of different artisans here, so.